This is going to be small and intimate, I think, and I'm the one leading this one because Niamh is off today.
I think because, you know, there are four of us, we may as well introduce Brian. Brian Curtin's a writer and curator who's based in Bangkok, who went with me to Crawford years and years and years ago.
Hi, Brian. It's nice to meet you.
Hi, everyone. Thanks. I just actually watched the video. It was brilliant. Really extremely interesting. My God.
Very good. So I'm Emma Lucy. I'm the CEO and Artistic Director here at Visual. It's nice to meet you, Brian. And Rosa, do you want to introduce yourself?
Hi, yeah, my name is Rosa Abbott and I've been Assistant Curator for a Woman in the Machine exhibition. And yeah, writer, curator based in London.
So
brilliant.
For the purpose of this, and because we're recording it, what I'm going to do, and we know each other, but what I'm going to do is just introduce the Woman in the Machine program. So Woman in the Machine was co-created by Visual and Carlow Arts Festival. It took the form of an exhibition, which we have here in Visual, but also there is a fantastic website, www.womanmachine.com, which gives information on the full project. Earlier this summer, we went into the Brawn factory site and we brought artists with us, and we made a really beautiful film called the 72-hour long weekend. And in June, we were one of the first places to bring audiences back for a short performance. We did 24 short performances over a weekend at the Brawn factory site, all part of Woman in the Machine. The whole program was kindly sponsored by Brightening Air, which was an initiative that emerged this year, I suppose, in response to where we've all been at in terms of COVID. So we were very grateful to get that fund and really delighted to be able to deliver such an expansive program of work as well. As part of it, like I said, there was an exhibition that is here at Visual and coming into its closing days, but George was one of the artists who was selected from Open Call. So we're delighted to have him here today to talk about one of the works that's in the exhibition, but also an additional piece of work that I suppose that complements the film that's here in the galleries. And just for those who I suppose are new to George's work, he is an Irish multidisciplinary artist and he lives and works in New York City, where he is currently sitting. So there's a bit of a time difference. So thank you for being with us here. And I suppose we're global at the moment. There's a few people from different places around the world. And he's represented by Ulterior Gallery in New York and has exhibited in numerous museums and galleries, Europe, America, Korea, and Canada. And I could go into an incredibly long and impressive list of places that he has shown in recent years. But I think what I might do is just pass it over to George and let him tell us what's been recent for him and what's been going on this summer, because I know there have been some very, very significant pieces of work, including featuring on the front of the New York Times this week for some work.
I'm just like trying to think where to begin, really. Yes, the Armory opened yesterday and I did the solo booth with Ulterior, and that was based on new works from 2021. I mean, I might actually start talking about the two film pieces, since they're what people might have looked at first.
My mentor was Scott Carpenter, also known as Malcolm Scott Carpenter, one of the original Mercury 7 astronauts. And I was fascinated by him, as everybody was at the time, as somebody who would let themselves be sent on a rocket up into the sky.
Basically, I did a residency at the Rauschenberg Foundation in 2013. And I became really interested in technology at that point, specifically Rauschenberg's endeavors with EAT, Experiments in Art and Technology. And I became obsessed with the Moon Museum. And because of that, the Moon Museum was like a 1/2 inch by 3/4 inch piece of ceramic, which had etched drawings from Warhol, Rauschenberg, Oldenburg, Forrest Myers, and and David Navras etched onto it. And it was smuggled aboard Apollo 12 because they couldn't get clearance from NASA, but because the engineers in Bell Laboratories, where a lot of EAT projects began, knew people on the actual launch pad in Florida. They knew, or Cape Canaveral, that they knew who to get to smuggle things onto the actual lunar lander. So I became obsessed with this idea of conservation in terms of planetary conservation, because Rauschenbusch was a huge environmentalist and heavily part of the environmental movement in the early 60s. And also the conservation of art, because of course art over the next 100 years, it's not very environmentally friendly in terms of storage and the sheer amount of it that is in storage. So I started making a film about the moon, Mac Moons and the Moon Museum. And then because of that, because of beginning that project, the director of the Rauschenberg residency mentioned me to the SETI residency, and they thought I was a perfect fit. So that's how I ended up at the Search for Extraterrestrial Intelligence Institute doing a residency there. And then basically that's how I met Margaret Race, who's in one of the films, and Seth Shostak, who's in the other film. But the residency gave me access to an awful lot of NASA scientists, and a lot of the scientists work between the two things. So basically I was, I would go on trips to California to, it's in Silicon Valley is where the actual headquarters of SETI are. And then I started meeting scientists, sometimes randomly and sometimes specifically, like Lawrence Doyle was somebody I really wanted to work with. And then I was walking down the hallway one day and I just saw planetary protector on somebody's door. And I just thought, what the hell is that? I mean, what does that even mean? And so that turned out to be Margaret Race. And so I started talking to Margaret Race about basically how she got into science. And what was very inspiring to me throughout the time at NASA and also the time at the SETI was how intergenerationally people mentored people. People really were so excited by what they did that they actually actively mentored people. So, I mean, I just loved the story of Margaret Race growing up in Boston and then randomly meeting this astronaut, or not randomly, but she wanted to meet him, but he obviously saw something in her as a child, like he saw the potential there, and actually just guided most of her career into her becoming planetary protector for NASA. And so part of the interest I had with that was that I was looking at the Warhol 15, the 15 minutes of fame, the still, I can't remember what they're actually called, but the still lives almost of people, portraits in film. And I thought this would be interesting in terms of capturing a kind of unreality, so that the green screen appears, or sometimes the person disappears, or there's sometimes there's a backdrop, there's no backdrop, or there's just a voice and disembodied, because I think a lot of what they're saying is so extraordinary and odd to people who are not astronomers, that I wanted those films to have that quality of being bizarre, but also referencing science fiction and referencing that kind of talking head interview standard thing, aesthetically speaking anyway. I'm rambling.
No, that's good. I think for us, I suppose for us is when we were selecting this work, so work comes to us through open submission, and we were looking at it and we were going, this is really interesting. Did he actually get to meet these people? So, and yeah, now we understand that you did a residency in the SETI. But I think what you described there in terms of kind of creating strange, like making something just, something that's absolutely real, but it's so beyond even our comprehension in lots of ways that it moves into this kind of this idea of fiction, but yet you have this incredible character like Margaret Race just talking about her life and how she ended up in this situation. So it's a really influential piece. Like even people who've come through the gallery space and have watched it have been like, is this real? Is that absolutely her job? Like,
yeah. and the part of the reason it's real is because when the Apollo missions happened in the 60s, there wasn't anything in place to actually really stop any kind of possible life form coming back from the moon. And so, like, essentially, we could have been open to any kind of microscopic life or plague or something like that. And so that's why her job exists. So she does all of the legislation. So she's working on the mission to Mars, essentially. So she's governing, like putting in all of the governmental legislation to do with the mission to Mars, so that we're never left open to something, well, just something not being properly thought about, essentially. But at the time, I suppose they were very naive about it, essentially.
Some kind of deadly virus, but we were able to make them ourselves. So
we're very busy with that. Very, very productive species. But
then I suppose there's more than one film. So there's so Margaret Race was, I suppose, one of the people that you met. So the other film that I suppose people have seen is the one with Seth Shostak. And this is where we really get into the realm of science fiction and his job as somebody who was just, they were coming to him to make films. Like, our understanding of space is, for so much of it, is through science fiction and through like it's and even our like looking at the space race happening, it was happening in other places in a very kind of a surreal way for us. So I found that film really, really interesting, just the things that he was asked to do for film.
I mean, what was interesting to me about science fiction in general, but also just what they're trying to do as a mission, was that so much science fiction becomes fact, about 30, 40, 50 years later. And so sorry, where am I going with this? Okay, so Lawrence Doyle, I met Lawrence Doyle, who is the person who discovered the first circumbinary planet on the Kepler missions for NASA. And so circumbinary means that it's a planet that orbits two suns. So basically, he when he and his team found this Kepler 16b, it's called, they basically they called up George Lucas to see if they could call the planet after Tatooine, which was Luke Skywalker's home planet, which also was circumbinary in the film Star Wars. So I've been continually inspired by this idea that these things are science fiction until they're not, or like fiction becoming reality continually through what they do. And then also, Seth advised on The Arrival. I don't know if anyone's seen that recently. And a lot of the kind of research that is done at SETI has to do with interspecies languages on this planet, because they're looking at humpback whales, for instance, to see if Lawrence Doyle also proved that humpback whales have a syntactical language. So essentially, baby whales babble, teenage whales have sang, and then adult whales have formalized grammatical language. And they prove this through information theory, and I'm kind of working on a film to do with that right now. So the large piece in the Armory is a depiction of Tatooine, essentially, but it's using the American West as a kind of sci-fi backdrop for the piece. And the piece has two crisscrossing rainbows across the front of it, because when you have two suns, you would have two rainbows after it rains. So there are these things that we haven't witnessed or haven't seen yet, but there are these probabilities that are happening continually.
There's a nice line in Margaret Race says something very nice about just the stars and sand, and basically, like, with the stars, we understand one star and its planets, but that's just, we haven't got even as far as understanding the second star and its planets yet. We're still at
yes.
So the room for fiction and science fiction is just vast. It's huge, and we enjoy it so much. So it's a really rich ground of, and like the residencies that you're talking about. So 2013 and 2016 were like, this residency in SETI has just, for your work, such an
It was huge for my work. I mean, it just kind of kept going because it plays into so many things. I mean, we trying to put this diplomatically, we as a species love stasis. We don't like change. We don't like to evolve. We try to stay the same all the time. We use religion to do it mostly. So we kind of, there's a new piece I made, and when we kind of look at the timelines that astronomy deals with, it is so ancient that anything that we do culturally is literally, like Carl Sagan used to talk about the cosmic calendar. If you put all of time into one day, we arrive on the scene, I think it's like in the last 2 minutes, and then gods arrive on the scene maybe in the last 30 seconds. So we're actually much older than that, and we need to actually look at facts. We need to actually look at where we are in the scheme of things. I mean, what's fascinating as well about astronomy is it's continually demoting us. So, we were the center of the universe, and then Copernican ideas, and then Galilean ideas, all of these things decenter us. We're just in a solar system, we're in a galaxy, we're in something. And for all of that, we're incredibly insignificant in terms of what we thought we were, in a sense, but at the same time, we're the only intelligent life we know. And so how do we then move to being more peaceful, moving towards better systems for us to have our survival, and move into a better 100 years and think about moving forward as a species, essentially, because we have to now. It's like we're on a precipice, environmentally speaking, and we have to do something. So astronomy really kind of informs the timelines that I'm actually looking at within my practice.
There's the architect Lena Bobardi wrote a very nice essay about the moon, and it was written around the time that we had just gone to the moon. Well, the US had gotten as far as the moon, and there's a line in the essay which is about how the moon has changed her countenance, and it was to do with the fact that we were now in this where we had looked at the moon with such a romantic. The moon in space with such romantic vision, and we were quite poetic about it. We had now moved into it as a scientific object, and her words are full of kind of there's an anxiety in them in terms of how we're about to explore and how we're about to kind of just, I suppose, move into that new territory. And I suppose you can really feel it right now. We were chatting about this a little bit earlier today about billionaires trying to bring tourists to space, and in other news.
Right.
We're looking at, you know, they're looking at mining the moon for different, for our purposes as well. So it is I think it's a very, we've kind of moved from that like moment of where space and the excitement and the kind of like, okay, we need to go and we need to explore, to kind of a hesitancy now about how we just need to mind what we have and figure out this before we plunder into other space. So
I mean, ideally, we start to really, you know, through law, change the environmental policies internationally with international collaboration, because we really are in a dangerous place in terms of the environment. And the idea that people deny climate change is so ludicrous. You know, does the tornado have to come to your door to actually realize that that may not have happened in West Cork or, you know, Kerry or somewhere before, or, you know, so the space tourism thing, I don't know. I mean, it must be fascinating to do, of course, but at the same time, you're going to the edge of the atmosphere. I'm not sure what the kind of scientific benefits of it are. It's an interesting thing. I haven't actually read enough about it to really comment on it coherently.
would
But
you go, George?
What's that?
Would you go if somebody gave you $1 million?
I mean, of course I would, but
There you go.
I wouldn't treat it as a tourist. I don't think. I would try and have a plan of what to do visually once I got out there. Otherwise, I think it would be a waste, really. But
and there are other films. So how many films were there in this mentor series?
There were meant to be 4. So basically I work quite randomly. I just finally I was looking around yesterday, looking at the booth, and I saw one piece and I was like, oh God, that image is from 2016. And I'm finally doing something with that image now. It's really, I'm a very random lateral thinker in terms of how I produce things. And so it can be quite odd how things recur. And then there was another piece that was a helmet that I saw with my parents at the Met about 5 years ago, I realized. And suddenly I was just like, I have to use this image right now for this concept, basically. So it's pretty diaphanous, really, as a thought process. The kind of larger scale or the more full-length films that I do besides this series tend to have a kind of a narrative from like cultural history, and then there'll be a kind of contemporary narrative of present factors, and then a kind of futuristic narrative which will be based on potential laws governing the environment or potential developments that will change how we think about things. So those are very complex, multiple narratives, and often contradict each other within the films as well, because I don't like this kind of too dogmatic, centralized, thesis of something that's just from me. And then this year I went to Texas to do a show in Marfa at Rural Gallery. And then I went to Big Bend National Park, which is at the southernmost tip of America, essentially. And a lot of people who are kind of coming across the border illegally tend to enter at that point. And so it was a very, it was an incredibly emotionally charged experience to be there, but it was also just this, you just felt so much sympathy for people who would put themselves through this to try and have some kind of life. So I'm kind of working on a small film for that as well. But it was also an amazing place because it's just this obscenely beautiful landscape, and there are farmers who, you know, half of their land is in America and half of it's in Mexico. So there was this kind of people just going about their business, you know, regardless of what was happening and how charged that was over the last 4 years. So, but also that became, you know, the kind of, some of that became the subject matter for the most recent work as well.
And this, sorry, that's your current work. Is there work made from that? This is your grant work, is it?
No, the work right now is still based on ideas of SETI and science fiction landscapes, and this idea. I mean, essentially, what really interests me about this endeavor that SETI are doing is that if we did find life, and it is very probably going to be within our lifetimes, even if it's microbial, we will it change us? Like, will it help us to actually see humans as humans and not be divided by cultural or racial divides or ridiculous politics or religion? So would that be a unifying factor for us as a species to move forward? So that really interests me as a potential step in evolution, or our ability to evolve to being less violent and caring more, I think. Yeah.
Well, I hope it'll be really interesting to see your work that comes out of that find and that moment when you find getting the rest of your life. It does happen in our lifetime. But what I might do is ask if there's any questions. There's a few more people in the room if they want to ask George anything. And then, oh, sorry, go ahead.
Sorry, I have a question. It might be a bit bland and you mightn't have an answer. But over the years, I am interested in the idea of artists who do research, and I'm very interested, and it's very important that the idea of research has sort of really opened up to curiosity, accident. It's broken down a very strict academic thing. I am very interested in the relationships that you formed, and when you go in to meet people, do you have a set of questions? Do you go drinking with them? You know, but there is a sort of, you know, there is that ethnographic thing, which now if you do a PhD, you have to embed yourself within.
Right.
When I was in the 80s and 90s, we didn't do that. But now I'm always meeting PhD researchers in Southeast Asia who have to live here for a year. So I'm curious about that process of how did you get on with people? What sort of, did you go in with questions? Did you go in with curiosity?
I went in with an intense fear. That's what I went in with, really, because I'd never studied science. And so it was a really kind of, I mean, the morning I turned up at NASA was the most frightening thing that ever happened to me, I think. And I went there was a bone density scientist, and she just basically just said, when you, I don't know how it works with art, but when you're a scientist, you just do an experiment, it fails, you do an experiment, it fails, you do an experiment, you learn something, do an experiment, it fails, and then you just finally do an experiment that works. And I was like, oh, so relieved. It's like, it's exactly the same. It's exactly the same. You know, you're like 90% goes in the bin, 10% goes on the wall, kind of thing. Okay. And so that was, you know, it was fear. It was just pure fear. So when I met anyone I met with, and when it was always with fear at the beginning. So I just read everything that I could find on them or their papers or whatever. And then I went to meet them with a set of questions because, of course, these people are very busy. They're kind of running around all the time internationally. So, some of the meetings were kind of happy accidents, but no, I never went drinking with anyone. But I did, I'll just tell you that I did get quite embedded with them because you would be in correspondence with them for years. And so I've never kind of, I'm the resident who never left, essentially. So I'm still kind
Were people open to
amazingly
you?
open. I was
Okay,
just
good.
astonished. I was really astonished. And also knew a lot about art. And that was the most amazing thing for me, because I thought, but also because of the complexity of what they do, everyone is a brilliant translator. So they can turn something into something you can understand. Like the first time I met Lawrence Doyle, he said, okay, well, I'm just going to show you, this room of information theory. And because I was like, how did you prove syntax in Wales? And he just brought me into this room, and it was just, the whole room was a blackboard, and the whole thing was a continuous equation. And I was like, I can't do anything with that. I can't even engage with that on any level. So you're going to have to just give me the narrative version, because there's literally nothing I can actually translate from this, not to mind, understand it on any level. So it was kind of amazing. Lawrence Doyle is just one of the most fascinating people who I became, I don't know if they would call me a friend, but I became friendly with almost everybody I met there. But Lawrence Doyle, every time he opens his mouth, what's coming out is so insane and extraordinary that you just forget anything that you went in there to ask him. So it was impossible to interview him. I had to try and do it multiple times. And then, he was just, he had the most amazing stories about animal research. Like there was, when they were researching the humpback whales, they did have a drinks party on the boat one night, and they dropped these mics 30 meters beneath the surface of the water over a kind of field of a few miles to monitor whale sounds. And they dragged up the mics next morning, started listening to the sounds. And what they were hearing was, I'm just going to try to do this, but anyway, not very successfully. And they were like, oh, there's something wrong with the mics. We're going to have to just start again. Oh no, basically the whole night's research was gone. So anyway, they just kept listening to them. They were like, no, they're mimicking us. We were too loud on the boat, and they're all mimicking us. So they were mimicking human speech patterns. So there were no more parties after
Right.
that.
Oh God, okay. That's incredible. That's incredible.
Yeah, and there's a whale they call Miles Davis, because he does these trumpeting sounds. And he played it for me, and it was astonishing. But so they can mimic animals that he said it's impossible that they could have heard these animals firsthand. It's extraordinary. The research is just mind blowing. And
have you touched on have you touched on just a typical question I'd ask? Have you touched on the gender of any of these animals, or has any of that discussion come up?
I don't know. I mean,
there is some writing on it.
I would definitely ask him that actually now. That's a great question. But the other thing about him is he has, I don't know if I should be saying this or not. Anyway, he has his baby nail on one hand. It's covered with glitter nail polish. And I have met him so many times, and I have never managed to actually ask what that means. And I presume it's something to do with the stars or some constellation or something, but I've never actually managed to even ask him that question. But
oh, interesting. Okay, good.
Wow. But honestly, when I went there, I had no idea what it would actually be like. But when you're actually there with scientists, you're like, this is the most like an art environment I've ever been in an arena outside of art, because it is all ideas. It's all continually trying or researching or thinking. And so it really, you'd actually love it, Brian. Let's face it. I think anyone would actually love it.
It's fascinating, I know. And the metaphors they've used throughout, and that you've used throughout in your speech, in your talks about it, they're so visual and they're so clear. It's very fascinating, yeah.
Well, I think it's because they're very clear. I mean, it's just a very easy it's a very easy thing to talk about because they're very, very specific as well. As
And are they all, I'm getting ahead of myself, sorry, are they all atheists? Does it produce a sort of
no,
atheistic,
no, they're not.
does it produce an atheistic?
No,
Interesting.
they're not.
Because
no.
that would be one of the dangers of studying all of this, was that you lose any sense of well, yes and no. As you said, there is, fiction becomes reality. So yeah.
I mean, the thing is that I can't categorically say there isn't a God, but I don't think we know what that is. And a God certainly wouldn't need a gender.
Yeah.
So I mean, so everyone has origin stories, but it's not for me. I think.
It's interesting about the art and research piece as well. Just that going into a place like that, where there's the space to think, and it's broad and wide in the same way that you'd like art to be. I was at a talk last night where A.L. Weisman was talking about their practice and forensic architecture and art and research, and just talking about post 9/11, which we're coming up to that right now.
Yes,
yeah. How his practice as an architect fundamentally changed after that point, and then it became about art and research. And he was making the point that culturally and institutionally, you would see, like after that moment, that you could see so much of that happening globally in institutions and art institutions and within artistic practice. So there's, and it was the first time I suppose I'd heard somebody kind of, and I suppose that moment was his in terms of 9/11, but there's definitely something there in this period of time in terms of how art has kind of taken on this wondering about the world and research. Like within the Woman in the Machine exhibition, there are so many of the artists who have done residencies within science departments or within engineering departments or within university departments. So I think
war departments, and
it's we're in a really interesting time for art in terms of that kind of collaboration and working and with each other and making with each other. So
I think those walls have kind of come down, and it's a kind of I think art had kind of separated itself to a large degree. I think research and art are such natural partners. It's an interesting it's interesting academically, the cross-pollination of things now, and it seems to be getting further and further towards that direction. I was here for 9/11 accidentally, and it was just I actually dug out some photographs that I took of that time, and I had never really looked at them before about a month ago, and it was just accidental that I took them out. But it was really, what was fascinating to me was the kind of media part of the coverage of it, or how there was just something discomforting about it, and it really comes across in the photographs. And it was really strange to see something. It's funny how your visual memory works, but to see something and then just it brings you right back to what it was, the feeling of something. So that was really a fascinating thing for me. Yes, I mean, I think New York changed New York changed at that point as well. Not that I was living here, but I think a lot of things changed at that point. Surveillance changed so much. Yeah.
So we might, if there aren't any more questions, we might just leave it there. But Brian, do you have one more question? Or you?
No, I was just waving. So great. God, thanks for everything. It's amazing to do this.
Yeah, an absolute pleasure, and just well done on. We were delighted to have work as part of the show, George, and to be able to catch you in a very, very busy week as well. We're very grateful for your time, and yeah, maybe we'll see you in Ireland at some point soon.
I mean, I hope so. Oh my God, I just want to go home so badly. Thank you so much for having me in the show, and it was just such a thrill to be a part of it, A Woman in a Machine.